All right, so here's the deal. I've been wanting to make this video for a while, and as I stated in my last video, things happened, wedding season got busy, and here I am. I'm finally open to making this video, especially with a long-term review. Today, I want to talk about a camera that has accelerated my growth, has accelerated my interest in wanting to film more, maybe even make a movie, short film, something of that sort, and really capture me into the filmmaking world. And that camera today, ladies and gentlemen, finally, is the S5ii. Now, there are a lot of different YouTube videos out there talking about this camera, from its new and improved autofocus system as compared to the last ones. And today we're actually testing on one of those today. I am recording this on the original S5. This is shot in vlog, so there will be a conversion to it. And to kind of make it similar to how the S5ii does record. But this is shot in the S5, and my last video talked about that the autofocus isn't bad, so we're going to find out today, is the autofocus actually really bad, or is it pretty good? So we'll find out. Hopefully this comes out good. Sorry if it doesn't. The S5 Mark II is the latest and greatest from Panasonic Lumix. You have the S5 Mark II and you have the S5 Mark II X. The S5 Mark II X has the ProRes RAW. It's got the Blackmagic RAW recording out to an external SSD, able to record out to also a Blackmagic monitor or something that can record ProRes, one of the Atmos monitors out there, where the S5ii kind of comes in just a little bit under. Now, for me, wanting to get into filmmaking and do different things with that, I wish I would have known that the S5ii was coming out. I think when I bought my S5ii, I knew about it, but it was 6 months after the fact that I would be able to get that. And I knew, especially for wedding filmmaking and the stuff I was trying to get into now to increase my skills of filmmaking, I knew I had to get something that I was really happy with, and I'm an impatient person. So I needed it immediately, and that comes in the S5ii. Now, this camera's great. There are a ton of videos out there. People have been making videos on this camera for quite some time, and I just want to share my experiences with it and what I like about the camera. For me, this is a camera that does absolutely everything I needed to do. For starters, as everybody talks about, the autofocus is new and improved. With the S5, which is a camera I bought after the S5ii, my GH5 Mark II, my G85s that I have, obviously the autofocus is light years better than what I was using on any of those cameras. With the new phase detect hybrid autofocus, I'm able to rely on the autofocus without worrying about anything. Even when I live stream, I had issues in the past with the GH5 Mark II where it would just constantly hunt for focus. If I moved just ever so slightly, it would completely miss my focus. Part of that was probably the lighting that I had and the way I had my whole setup going. It just wasn't that great. So for those, I had to lock manual focus and just roll with it that way. With the S5 Mark II, no issues with that anymore. The autofocus is obviously much better. Now, we are going to talk about that autofocus just a little bit later, because while it is improved, it's not the best out there. But I don't want to stray away from the fact that the autofocus is far superior than what was on the previous Lumix cameras. And it is something that I would trust daily. I do it every time I go to a wedding. I almost never manual focus unless absolutely necessary. Maybe somebody's head got in the way, or I'm trying to make sure that I get a little bit farther out rather than what's in the foreground there. Sometimes the foreground is captured. So with this, autofocus, absolutely key. It's the #1 spec on this camera that makes it 100% worth it, especially if you're already in the Lumix family. Now, one of the next features I want to talk about is something that you see plaguing the Sony cinema camera, the prosumer cameras, all of that. No overheating with this camera. I don't understand why anybody would buy a camera that overheats. With the S5, I had to put up a little blip on the screen letting you know, because I forgot to say it, that there is a 30-minute record limit with the original S5 in the 10-bit modes. Now, if you go down to 8-bit, you can record unlimited, but I think Panasonic feels that if you're in a 10-bit mode, it's going to get much hotter and it's going to stop after 30 minutes of recording. So for me, stop talking. Hopefully I get through this video before the 30 minutes. With the S5 Mark II, that issue is no longer an issue. They included fans that are internally kind of pumping out that heat I never hear the fans. I never feel the fans. I never even really feel the heat coming out. You can change the settings in the camera to either do like an auto or a high-low on the temperature setting, to where once it reaches that certain threshold, the camera will shut off or at least give you a warning. I've never had that come up, so I really don't even know what it does specifically to counteract that. I've shot out in super hot summer days here in the United States, and I've been able to have zero issues shooting up to 4K 60 without ever fearing about an overheating issue. It's one of the reasons that drove me to Panasonic. I knew I wanted to do long form content. I wanted to do podcasts. And for me, this is a no-brainer when it comes to that, especially with the vents that are included in it. I believe also the G9 Mark II, I could be wrong, also has these vents. It is a very similar body to the S5 Mark II. So if you are looking for that Micro Four Thirds kind of setup, obviously G9 Mark II is going to have those same features that this camera has. Now, the next part about this camera that's just absolutely fantastic, and I talked about it when I was talking about the original S5, something it doesn't have, is the 6K open gate recording mode. Now, it's a buzzword heard around the world. I had no idea what it was either until I looked it up right before I bought this camera. Basically what that means, with the 6K open gate function on this camera, you're able to capture the whole sensor. You have a 3x2 sensor within this camera, and typically what you see is a 16:9, probably what you're watching this video on now, and it's just kind of that wider, flatter screen. With this one, you're able to record in that 3x2 setup, so you can capture everything that the sensor is seeing. What that's really good for is, first of all, you're recording in 6K versus 4K. My last video was in 6K. This is probably going to be only recorded in 4K, but also uploaded in 4K. So when I render these videos out on the S5 Mark II, if I do shoot in the 6K mode, I downscale it down to 4K, but you are getting that extra detail recorded with it and more information, so you could be able to actually get the perfect image, crop in whatever you want to do, and have a fantastic image quality. With this, you can also crop for social media. So one of the latest and greatest things out there, unfortunately, especially for content creators, is the vertical format. So if you want to go to Instagram or YouTube Shorts or TikToks, you're able to do that right from that 6K mode without sacrificing height. You're able to get full height, full low, as much as that sensor can absolutely capture, crop it in, and now you have a perfect 9x16. There are a lot of creators out there that are buying cameras that are far more expensive than this one. And what they're doing is they're turning their camera sideways. For photography, I absolutely understand it. For some reason, I can't even hold my camera without doing this anymore. I struggle doing this, even though I do primarily video. But when I go take a photo, I just want to flip it. But for video, I just can't find myself flipping the video like that, or the camera rather. It's just weird to me. And the fact that there are people out there that do that, it kind of blows my mind. Even on a normal 9x16, I would just crop in the 16:9 video that I already took into that 9x16 and just make sure that I frame it correctly if that's the route I want to go. But for the open gate 6K mode, no more needs for turning your camera sideways. Just record it, crop it in, perfect middle ground set for your 9x16 videos. Another reason I picked up this camera is with Micro Four Thirds, I obviously struggled in low light. It's a very tiny sensor that has only certain capabilities when it comes to boosting the ISO. And with this, you can go in the vlog mode, just like the original S5, 640 and 4000 on your low and high end. Again, with these cameras, I've been able to boost it past 4000 without worrying about absolutely destroying my image or getting a super amount of noise. And with this camera, you also have a giant sensor here. It's a full frame camera versus the Micro Four Thirds. So you let in a lot more light. You pair it with a fast lens, like a 1.8, which correction to pretty much every video I've shot. I keep saying that these lenses I'm shooting in are 1.7s. The primes for the S primes for these are 1.8s. I'm so used to saying 1.7 for the other primes I have for my Micro Four Thirds, but I digress. With this, with a 1.8 lens, or if you get yourself a Lumix Pro lens that goes down to 1.4, you're able to capture everything in nearly pitch black, it feels like sometimes. I have a light here in front of me. I don't have it on a whole lot. I have no other lights on in this room, just one light, one little 60-watt light, and I'm able to perfectly expose this image, at least to my standards, maybe not by a full-on cinematographer who knows exactly what he's doing. I'm learning here just like the rest of you. I'm able to capture everything without worrying about Did I get my exposure correct? These things can handle it. They are perfect in low light situations. For anybody that wants to take a traveling camera or anything like that, you're worried about it even with the kit lens, you're able to do just fine in low light exposures, and it's fantastic. Another thing I love about this camera is the amount of cinema features that you have built in. Not only does it have all of these features built into it, but it is super easy to use. A lot of people out there saying they do like the Sony menus. I found myself struggling the last time I picked up a Sony camera. I believe it was the A7S III was the last one I used, or maybe the A7R4. I've used both. And for me, the Lumix system is the easiest system in the world to use. You're able to scroll through, find exactly what you want. It's very, very detailed on what it is that you're looking at. And you can also hit the display button on the back, and it will also tell you what that setting is. In case you're not sure what it is that you might be about to change or what you're looking at, all you have to do is hit the display button. It shows you exactly what you're looking at and tells you exactly what it does. With those cinema features, you get your waveforms and vector scopes, something that you don't see in a lot of other cameras. So you know that you're getting your exposure right, and you know that you're getting your colors and everything as best as you can in camera. I love that those features are included on here. I have a custom button up front to turn my waveform and vector scopes off. There are plenty of functions on here to be able to really, in my opinion, go out and at least do a short film or definitely documentary shooting with this. I use it for weddings all the time. I also use it to film the family. I use it for pretty much everything that I do filming wise, unless I'm talking about it. And there's so many features on here that I still haven't used, and it's endless and easy and right at your fingertips for you to be able to use. It's one of the best menus I've ever seen on a camera, and no other companies, in my opinion, can touch the menu system or the features for this price point. And one other thing I want to talk about, and I see a lot of negativity on this, when people talk about the comparison of something like this to whether it be the Sony or a Canon camera, are the lenses that you can get with this camera. A lot of people say there are not a lot out there, and in my opinion, I think that's just simply wrong. For me, every possible lens that I could possibly want, I can get for this camera that are natively used on this camera with the L-mount Alliance. What the L-mount Alliance, if you're unfamiliar and this is your first video on the S5 II, is an alliance between Leica, Sigma, and Panasonic Lumix to be able to make lenses for this L-mount system. I believe Blackmagic uses the L-mount system. Obviously, the Sigma FP, I think that's the only camera I've ever seen. If there's more out there, I'd love to know about them. The Sigma FP and most of these Lumix full frame cameras are all using the L-mount system. For me, today I'm recording on Lumix S Prime 50mm lens at 1.8. All of their primes are the exact same size. All of them are at 1.8, and they're nearly identical in weight as far as I know. Most people, when you hear about them, you're able to set them up on a gimbal, and no matter what you're doing, if you got to change out your lens to get wider or tighter, you're going to have pretty much the same weight, same distance, same length on that lens to be able to not have to worry about resetting up and recalibrating your gimbal. It makes for a fantastic line of lenses, and on top of that, once again, we talked about the Sigma lenses. My almost everyday lens on this camera here is the 24-70 from Sigma. It's an f2.8. It weighs less. It's smaller than the Lumix one. It was far cheaper than the Lumix. I think about $800 cheaper. I might put it on the screen here if I remember. But it's a fantastic lens, and I have no issues with autofocus. I have no issues with it working exactly how I would expect a Lumix lens to work. It's a fantastic lens, and there are a ton more out there. Lumix just dropped another one that everybody is kind of hyped over right now, the Lumix 28-200. That is a far superior range of any lens I've ever seen, ever. And it's a very small lens. It's about the same size as their kit lens, which is a 20-60. So this lens here, and it's not much bigger than this. And honestly, when you zoom it, it doesn't zoom out much more. Now, of course, a lot of people's complaints about that lens is the aperture settings for that. I believe it's 4 to 7.1 or something like that. So naturally, unless you got a ton of light or really daylight settings, you wouldn't really want to use that lens in my opinion, but there are a ton of other options, affordable and not affordable, if you really want to go to the best class that you could possibly get from Lumix out there for these cameras. On top of that, they are perfect for attaching your PL mounted cinema lenses too. And of course, let's not forget that there are L mount anamorphic lenses out there that this camera is perfect for. Which brings me to my next point. We talk about all of the lenses and all the other features, but like almost a ton of Lumix cameras out there now, this thing can do anamorphic, and it can do a D-squeeze on the screen for you so you know exactly what your footage is gonna look like. It's a fantastic value. There's no other camera out there, in my opinion, that has the same value as this camera. Right now, I believe you can get it for $1,800 and that is with a free lens. We're talking about a full frame camera that can do 6K open K, anamorphic, tons of cinema features, no overheating for $1,700 with a free prime lens. That's an insane value to me that I don't think any other company out there can tell me that they can match. There are great, smaller, very capable Sony cameras out there around that same price point. The FX30 comes to mind typically when I talk about this price point, where the FX30 I think comes in at about the same $1,700. But then you're looking at purchasing lenses for it, and on top of that, it is a crop sensor. It's an APS-C sensor, so I believe that's a 1.5 times crop to the full frame. So then you're looking at less low light capabilities, even though the Sonys can boost massive amounts of ISO into their cameras, but you're not getting that full frame value and you're spending more. It just doesn't make sense to me. The newest Blackmagic camera that just recently came out, I believe it's a 6K cinema camera. It can also do the open gate features, but I hear not great things about their autofocus, and there's some other issues with that camera. It's gigantic and bulky, where I know most people, if they walk onto a set, they want to be carrying the bigger cameras. They want to have a cinema type camera with them. But for me, you can rig this thing out. I've got one of the small rig cages on it, I believe the Black Mamba. I can rig this out without even having a V-mount battery yet. Once you put a V-mount on there, you're looking like one of your box cameras. A lot of people complain about features in a camera like this that come in a photo body. To me, I don't have a problem with it. It's very comfortable. It feels familiar to me. I think it is one of the best values out there, period, blank. There's nothing else out there, and nobody can change my mind on that. Now, of course, we've got to talk about some of the features that I wish were on this camera that I could use day to day, and a few things that I don't like about some of the features that are already on this camera. For me, the autofocus is nearly perfect. Again, coming from some of the cameras like the one I'm using now, or the Micro Four Thirds cameras I've used with the contrast-based autofocus system, this camera is able to pretty much nail every shot that I throw at it. Now, with that being said, there is one issue that I find, and I haven't quite figured out how to fix it. There could be something in camera that I need to be doing. I haven't had a chance to really look at it and try to figure it out, or at least from the eye test, I don't know if there actually is a fix for it. But typically, especially when I'm at a wedding, if I have focus on a certain subject, maybe the bride, the groom, both of them, you see the boxes over their heads. If somebody is in the background, especially if they're walking by or something, this camera has a tendency to automatically go to that person. So I find myself constantly tapping on the screen to bring it back to the subjects that I actually want in focus. It's an issue that I do see as a minor problem with this autofocus that is actually very frustrating to me, but it is something I've gotten used to, and once again, it's far superior than anything I've ever used. The Sonys are top dogs when it comes to autofocus, and if you need the greatest autofocus, go get your Sony. But for me, if you want best value, you stick with the Lumix. Now, one last thing about this, again, this camera can do 4K 24, 4K 30, 4K 60. It does have a slight crop on it. A lot of people complain about it. I don't care. I came from Micro Four Thirds. Does not bother me at all. Back up some, you'll be fine. I don't understand the complaint about it, but it's out there. It does do 120, but only at 1080. So if you want to be able to do 120 frames, you're going to have to go down to 1080, which I think is still a fantastic image. You're going to be very satisfied with it. Doing a little upscaling in your editing program to the 4K image, it's totally fine. I've done it before. It's great. Now, with that higher frame rate, it does come at the cost of autofocus. You will have to manual focus with the higher frame rate. I don't understand this. I'm sure, again, the Sonys are fine at even a 4K 120. Some of those with no crop. But with this, You can do the higher frame rates. I don't necessarily need them, so it doesn't bother me at all, but it does come with the expense of not 4K and no autofocus. That is going to be it for me on this camera. If you have any questions or you want to see more about it, please leave it down in the comments below. I do plan on doing at some point some settings of what I use day to day, especially for weddings, because believe it or not, I don't shoot and vlog for weddings. I use a natural picture profile and some settings adjusted to go with that. This camera to me is best value out there. Sure, Sony's have better autofocus. If you want better autofocus, go to Sony. Outside of that, I think image quality, cinema features, price point, this is an unbeatable value. Not to mention incredible stabilization in body, especially when paired with a lens. Some of the Lumix S lenses have optical image stabilization on those. So you pair those two together, you have a perfectly still image. You can almost run. I've walked and done a lot of things with a giant 70 to 200 lens. No issues whatsoever. I think it's fantastic. And I think if you are looking for a camera and you have the budget, this should be the one you should be getting. I appreciate anybody that has made it this far, anybody that has watched this video. There are more to watch. There are more coming. I have lots more planned, especially about the lenses that I currently own, the audio that I use, everything under the sun, including this giant light that is currently blinding me. Let me know if you want to see any more about this. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.